operations in Lebanon. The scene live in southern Lebanon this evening. It's 10 o'clock local time, as you can see there. Israel said earlier today that 3 northern areas have been designated as closed military zones. That's a possible precursor to an invasion. And our colleagues at NBC say an operation could begin imminently. This follows a series of airstrikes over the weekend, beginning with the attack that killed the militant group leader of Hezbollah in southern Beirut on Friday. We are keeping a close eye on this developing situation this evening. Let's first bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. Dominic, what is the situation as it stands at the moment?
Well, we understand from US officials quoted here as saying that they believe an invasion is imminent. We know from reports in the region that the Lebanese government has said that the Lebanese military has withdrawn from parts of the border area. Reuters are saying back 5 kilometres, but they're not confirming that to our sources. And the Israelis have also indicated publicly, but also through other sources, that this is highly likely. And this follows reporting in the New York Times and other outlets that the Israelis have already been involved in terms of boots on the ground in Lebanon, but in a special forces capacity. So either going in, parachuting in, or going in more covert means. And they have been, it seems, scouting the area, possibly looking for sort of as pathfinder troops for a bigger invasion, or alternatively could be looking for those missile silos and missile depots that the Air Force has been striking. But all the signs are, I would say, that an invasion is imminent. I think at the moment it does seem to be, the indications are that it's going to be limited, but I think the fear is not just in the American capital, but in other Western capitals, that it could become more drawn into a bigger conflict and a bigger invasion of Lebanon, as the Israelis have in the past, sometimes at their cost. But all I can say at the moment is I think on a number of fronts we're getting a pretty clear impression that this is going to happen. If it hasn't already, there are Israeli troops on the way in or about to be going into southern Lebanon, crossing the border in a number of places. And that obviously follows this extraordinary escalation in hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah that began with a pagers attack, the walkie-talkies attacks, thousands of Hezbollah members, but also civilians caught up in that extraordinary attack when thousands of pages and electronic devices exploded. Then that was followed by, of course, the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and an increase in aerial activity, assaulting a number of points around Lebanon. And then it seems the Israeli military, the Air Force and artillery, taking the gloves off in terms of going not just after Nasrallah, but also a number of other commanders, but also going after those missiles. Hundreds, over 150,000 missiles Hezbollah is thought to have in its possession, and the Israelis have been looking for them and striking them where they can find them, not just in the south, but also in Beirut and in the Bekaa Valley. So, as is often the case with Israeli military offences, they begin from the air and then that's followed up on the ground. That's exactly how it's proceeded after October the 7th in Gaza and in previous Gaza offensives. And this does seem to be, according to these reports at least, that seem to be reliable reports, and from what American officials are saying, is what's about to unfold in Lebanon too.
Dominic, thank you. We're just going to cross now to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's standing by following these developments for us from Jerusalem. And Alistair, Dominic there talking about a ground invasion imminent. What would that look like? Dominic was talking about the feeling that this would be limited in these early stages.
Well, that word limited has been used a lot over the last couple of hours in briefings, both from US officials to American media, which is where a lot of this news seems to be coming out from, but some journalists in Israel reporting similar language being used. I think Dominic was touching on it there. The problem with suggesting it's going to be a limited ground invasion, well, firstly, that's only from one military's perspective. You know, you cannot invade another person's sovereign country and assume that things are going to run as smoothly as that. And I think that is the great fear amongst Western nations in particular, who have cautioned Israel against doing this. You can find yourself quite quickly dragged into something much more substantial when you're trying to achieve your objectives. And Israel's objectives is to push Hezbollah back from its borders, and quite a long way back from its borders, anywhere between 10 and 15 kilometres, if Hezbollah are going to be forced to abide by the UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which is what came into force at the end of the last Israel-Lebanon war in 2006. Now, although Israel has done a lot of initial work over the last few weeks from the air, and I think we now can probably say with some confidence that there's been special forces operations going on as well to prepare the ground, there are still a lot of unknowns if and when, or even as they are now entering southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has taken a real battering over the last few weeks, but I think there is a working assumption that there will be many Hezbollah fighters in the tunnels below the hills of southern Lebanon, and that could draw Israel into a very big fight indeed. Hezbollah have been saying very boldly, as they've tried to reclaim some of their power and deterrence following the last 2 weeks, that they want a ground invasion, they want to be fighting on their own territory. They can't really defend against airstrikes. They have very limited power. I mean, they have shot down, over the last year, they have shot down a few Israeli drones on occasions, but basically speaking, the Israelis have total air superiority, and that has allowed them to carry out airstrikes pretty much at will over Lebanon. It is a very different matter when you send ground troops into southern Lebanon, a Hezbollah stronghold, an area of territory that Hezbollah knows extremely well, an area that Hezbollah has been preparing for this moment for almost 2 decades. And so that's why, even if Israel's intentions are to carry out a limited ground invasion, and, I should say that is all, what we're hearing via various sources from officials. Nothing has been confirmed yet on the record by Israeli military or political figures. But if they are planning a limited ground invasion, then history tells us that things can always go in a very different direction.
OK, Alistair, thank you for the moment. Alistair Bunkle for us in Jerusalem. Stay with us, Alistair, because I just want to bring people tuning in up to date with what we know so far this evening. This breaking news: Lebanese media have reported heavy artillery fire in border towns in the country's south. Sky News understanding that some Lebanese armed forces troops are repositioning near the border amid reports of an Israeli ground operation. We have just had a tweet from David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. He said he was speaking to Secretary Blinken this evening, of course, the US Secretary of State. He said, "We were clear on the need for a diplomatic solution in the Middle East. The UK is calling for an immediate ceasefire and the implementation of a political plan that allows displaced Israeli and Lebanese civilians to return to their homes." So that's the latest reaction from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. Let's bring in Dominic Waghorn, who is with us. And Dominic, we heard the US President Joe Biden speaking earlier today, asked for his reaction to what is unfolding on the border there in Lebanon. And he again said that they wanted an immediate ceasefire. This call for a ceasefire is loud and clear, yet this is unfolding. Can you just put this into context for us in terms of Israel's reaction to this call for a ceasefire?
Yeah, and we should probably go back a week, actually. At the beginning of last week at the UN General Assembly, there was an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council at which there was a huge amount of concern expressed about the situation in the wake of sort of the escalating events we've seen there in the wake of the walkie-talkie and the pager attacks and the increase in exchange of fire. And in the wake of that Security Council meeting, there was really very intense diplomacy that was led by America and France, but all G7 nations were on board, and a number of Middle Eastern countries as well. And at the by sort of the end of the evening, American officials were sounding very confident publicly, saying that they believed the parties had seen the text of a ceasefire proposal and that they believed a ceasefire could be implemented in the coming hours, to use their words. And by the next day, the Israeli Prime Minister made it clear that that wasn't the direction he was going to take his country in, although he had privately assured American officials, the Americans have made it pretty clear, that he was amenable to a ceasefire. And that seems to have been in the wake of a kind of political backlash publicly, but also amongst the more far-right end members of his coalition government who were saying, surely this is not the time for Israel, when they've got Hezbollah by the jugular to ease off on the organisation, and a 21-day ceasefire was out of the question. So he then took things in obviously a dramatically different direction. And shortly after he spoke at the UN General Assembly, we had the news that those devastating airstrikes had struck in Beirut and Hassan Nasrallah had been the target, and he and a number of other commanders had been killed. There was another UN Security Council meeting 2 days later, and we heard very, very similar speeches, but it didn't lead to anything. And the Middle Eastern diplomats I was talking to after that said that that was inevitable and it was very depressing, and they were rather despairing, and they were saying, what is the point of the UN Security Council meeting, calling for a diplomatic solution, which all the powers are still calling for, if Israel is going to reject the outcome of any diplomatic process. So, there is, I think, a sense of despair amongst regional diplomats, but there's clearly a determination amongst American diplomats in particular to try and pursue a diplomatic solution, to try and still produce a ceasefire. The problem with that, of course, is they've been trying to do that in Gaza for a year and have singly failed to do so. And Hezbollah has always said that it's attacking Israel and was the first to open fire on October the 8th, but it said it was doing so because it needed to act in solidarity with its Arab brothers and sisters in Gaza. So the two conflicts and the two searches and quests for ceasefires are contingent on each other. So while there's no progress diplomatically in Gaza, there's no progress or likely to be progress with a ceasefire with Hezbollah. But obviously the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel is acquiring a momentum of its own now, but the Americans will do what they can to bring about some kind of diplomatic solution. What they're also trying to do is show solidarity with Israel and ward off Iran from getting involved. They are very worried about the prospect of Iran coming to the aid of Hezbollah, a proxy ally of Tehran, but also an organisation that Iran has always regarded as an insurance policy and has armed and supplied and trained, and has done so not least because it wants Hezbollah to act as an insurance policy for the day that Israel might attack Iran. And I think the fear is that Iran could get involved directly, and that's why the Americans are making it very clear they stand foursquare behind Israel. Despite their diplomatic frustrations, they're sending a lot of military forces, or have done over the last week or so, saying to the Iranians, if you're thinking about getting involved, don't, it's not worth it.
Dominic, thank you. Well, if you are just joining us here on Sky News this evening, we understand that Israel is planning what is being called a limited ground operation into Lebanon that could begin imminently. This is according to a US official, an administration official, and it's coming from our colleagues at NBC. Israel informing the US that the incursion into southern Lebanon could begin as early as this evening, and the intent is to push Hezbollah forces further away from the Israeli border and target their infrastructure, including stockpiles and weapons. Let's bring in my colleague Yalda Hakim, who is in Beirut for us tonight. And Yalda, it really does feel that things are ramping up this evening and a tense wait there where you are.
Yeah, I mean, SJ, Dom just gave you a timeline there of events of the last 10 days, and they've been dramatic at every twist and turn. You know, those pages and the walkie-talkies that exploded about a week and a half ago, and then the targeted strikes that we saw on apartment blocks, the killing of Hezbollah's longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah just a couple of nights ago. Throughout every one of these twists and turns, the ongoing anxiety and concern that the people of Lebanon have had and the international community has been, will this turn into a ground offensive? Because don't forget, this is a country that has been here before. In 2006, we saw a bloody 30-day conflict that left 1,000 people dead. And just to put it into perspective for you, since Monday, 1,000 people have died, 1 million people are on the move. So suddenly there is a realization in this country that Israel has tolerated the rockets coming over the border from Hezbollah for 11 months, and they have now felt that they have momentum on their sides. They have been targeting Hezbollah's top command for a week now. Even at this point, when Hezbollah's leader has been killed, they have been conducting what they've described as surgical strikes. And now, this evening, reports coming in the last couple of hours that Israel is planning a limited ground operation into Lebanon. Now, we've been getting these reports from our sister channel, NBC, but it has been widely reported over the last couple of days that the Israelis have been moving certain special forces to the area, brigades, about 5 brigades to the border area, planning to, poking essentially and probing and trying to figure out how far they should push. And frankly, throughout this entire time, and we've heard from Benjamin Netanyahu, he has wanted a much bigger attack and invasion and ground operation of Lebanon. But we're also being told that the Americans have asked them to keep this limited, to keep this focused, and to just go as far as they feel that they should in order to move those citizens that they're worried about, the 60,000 or so citizens of northern Israel back up to the border. So there are a lot of developments here at the moment. As you've been reporting, parts of that northern border of Israel is now a closed military zone. And this idea that an imminent ground offensive could take place as soon as this evening is something that we continue to hear. Let's bring in John Sparks, who's here with me now. And John, I mean, this is what we have been hearing, haven't we, for the past week or so? People have been concerned. A lot of sources have said maybe, maybe not. And now these reports coming in that even Lebanese TV saying that they are pushing.
Yeah, I think this move has been fairly well telegraphed, really, over the last couple of days. As you said, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, he was speaking to community members in northern Israel today. He said that the war would enter a new phase. It was coming soon, he said. He said, we've been speaking to our sister channel, NBC. They have sources in the Israeli military saying that an offensive could come very quickly. Some details from the Israelis passed on to the US. The Israeli intention is to push Hezbollah away from the border to target infrastructure, Hezbollah infrastructure and weapon supplies as well. A couple of lines that have just dropped in the last few minutes. Sky News understanding that the Lebanese army has repositioned itself. What does that mean? That means it is almost certainly moving itself away from the frontier that Lebanon and Israel share. Also hearing from the Israelis that 3 towns on the northern border have now been declared closed military zones. That gives you a pretty good indication that an incursion is likely, even highly likely, in the next hours.
Yeah, I mean, John, we have been told that the offensive will be limited in duration and scope. Mm-hmm. Clearly, the Americans have said to the Israelis, look, we don't want this to be dragged on and for it to go on and on. You're looking at our camera there on the Israel-Lebanon border, looking out to southern Lebanon. And let's just show you these images.
That's right. Okay, and we have had reports in the last hour of heavy artillery fire, of tank fire in southern Lebanon. That has come from Lebanese military sources. And there we can see it. We can see what is happening. I mean, in military terminology, that would be described as softening up the ground in advance, potentially in advance for an incursion. As you say, the Israelis saying that it will be, or certainly indicating that it will be, limited in scope. I think one important thing for us to focus on is how Hezbollah is going to see this. I think it was interesting that in the last speech that Hassan Nasrallah gave, that after the walkie-talkie explosions, the pager explosions, he, in a provocative statement within that speech, he welcomed the Israelis to come in, to do your incursion, to do your invasion, and there was a reason for that. That is because he believed at the time that it put Hezbollah in a stronger military position, fighting the war on their turf, if you will, on their territory, where they know the ground, where they have dug themselves in. They may have tunnels as well. That was something that Nasrallah, I think that it was provocative. There was a use of language there to sort of stick it to the Israelis, but he clearly felt that that was a stronger arena for them. He can't compete in a sort of direct confrontation with the Israelis, but an Israeli land incursion into southern Lebanon, well, he thought that transferred the odds over to Hezbollah. That put them in a stronger position.
Yeah, it's been quite extraordinary to watch the tactical success that Israel has had in targeting Hezbollah over the course of the last week and a half or so. We've seen how superior their cyber and technology advances are when it comes to the precision strikes and the pager explosions and the walkie-talkies, and identifying and targeting Hassan Nasrallah, and how deeply penetrated Hezbollah had become. But a ground offensive is a completely different thing, isn't it? It's a bit of a slippery slope for the Israelis. And I guess that's why there's a lot of talk about limiting this in scope and geography.
Yeah, I think it depends on intention, doesn't it? If this is a limited campaign, if, as the Israelis have indicated to the Americans, that this is about pushing Hezbollah back, destroying their infrastructure, destroying their weapons supplies, that's something that's going to sound palatable both to the military experts, probably to the Israeli public as well. You know, this would represent the fourth time that Israel has invaded Lebanon in the last 50 years. You know, Israel has been there before, and they have every reason to be highly cautious about this. They have been hurt in the past. 2006, they fought a brief, fierce war, and the implications for both sides were severe. And I think the Israelis have been cautious leading up. They've clearly done a huge amount of intelligence work before they go into this, before they consider putting troops on the ground. But you know what? They take a risk if they get comfortable. If they go in, they don't complete their objectives, they don't complete their goals, they're not able to stop Hezbollah rocket fire and missile fire. Do they go further? Do they go further? That might suit Hezbollah, who will be well dug in. They have tens of thousands of battle-hardened troops who've been active in Syria over the past decade. Their top commanders, their leadership has been completely decimated by the Israelis, but they do have people who have a great deal of experience on the battlefield.
Yeah, John, the sound of the horns that we can hear right now are of cars. They're going off, the alarms of the cars, because of the explosions that are taking place. We're going to come back in the next few minutes and just take a break, but I'm going to leave our audience with those images we saw earlier of our cameras that captured the artillery fire, and we'll be back in the next few minutes.
It's a clash between barbarism and civilization.
The failures of October the 7th are the failures of Benjamin Netanyahu.
He was in complete shock. Everything he believed about Hamas turned out to be wrong.
They are bent on Israel's destruction.
I think he's the greatest statesman we've had.
He's not a diplomat, he's a populist politician.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that?
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me!
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching our live and continuous coverage of the latest developments in the war between Israel and Hezbollah. We've been receiving reports this evening that the Israeli ground offensive has now begun, and I just want to show you some of the artillery fire that has taken place, extensive artillery fire. You can see the heavy artillery fire taking place there on the border, and I'm being told that the finger of the Galilee was declared a closed military area, and that the Israelis are almost in now. But we are being cautious because the Israelis have told the Americans, their American counterparts, that this ground offensive is going to be limited in scope and geography. We're also being told that the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu, wanted to conduct a much larger ground offensive, but the Americans have cautioned them, and that President Biden is still keen on some kind of ceasefire talks developing imminently as well. We're watching these images now on our camera, which is facing southern Lebanon, and you can hear the artillery fire, the gunfire that's taking place there at the moment, and the northern border is now a closed military zone. Well, let's bring in our John Sparks, who's been watching all of the developments here. And John, you were saying earlier that the Lebanese army has retreated at least 5 kilometers from their positions?
Yelda, there were initial reports that the Lebanese army had pulled back, had retreated 5 kilometers from the border. We're now hearing, they have subsequently denied that, but we have spoken to them directly. They have told us that they are repositioning. What does repositioning mean? That means that they are withdrawing. They are getting away from the border area. As you say, there is extensive artillery and tank fire of positions in southern Lebanon as well. This, in addition to aerial fire, aerial strikes from the Israelis. That is a highly active military zone at the moment. We also know that 3 Israeli towns in northern Israel are now subject to they're now being described as closed military zones. Another strong indication that an incursion is about to begin or has already begun. One other thing I can add from UNIFIL, there's a UN force called UNIFIL on the border. We have been speaking to them. They have told us that they are unable to patrol. They have gone back to their base or their multiple bases along the border. They are not coming out. They will monitor things as best they can, but they will not come out. I think that gives you a pretty good idea of just how active things are now on the southern Lebanese border.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go to our Alistair Bunkle, who joins me now from Israel. And Ali, I mean, the truth of the matter is that Israel had begun probing operations already. I mean, they were down there, they had sent more brigades to the area, to their special forces. They were probing for some time, but we're now seeing and hearing that ground incursion. I mean, we're hearing that it's imminent, but it may already have begun.
Yeah, I think there are lots of reports that it has already begun. I mean, in the dark of night, it is impossible to tell until we get official confirmation from the Israeli military or the Israeli government. But there are quite a lot of reports around the Middle East in media networks, news networks and newspapers in the Middle East that the Israeli military has now gone into southern Lebanon. Quite a few saying that tanks have been spotted in the border village of Ramish. Now, look, I mean, these are just reports, and so we've got to be careful with that. But every indication is that if the ground invasion has not started quite yet, it is close to doing so. And so we wait and see how this pans out. As you say, there's been probing missions that have been going on for some time, and the Israeli military has also been bombing the area very heavily in order to try and soften up the ground ahead of this invasion. And if you think that they've had good intelligence on the movements and the whereabouts of Hezbollah commanders, they will also have gathered, I've no doubt, very good intelligence of the landscape in southern Lebanon. But it is Hezbollah's own territory. I have stood on that border and I have seen Hezbollah, with my own eyes operating and moving around. And this is why Hezbollah will feel more comfortable fighting Israel on its own territory. There's nothing they can really do against the airstrikes, the waves of airstrikes that have been going on, not just for the past couple of weeks, but for the past 12 months. But if they have Israeli forces on their own territory, they will have a confidence that they can take the fight to them and level the ground with them somewhat. And that is the major risk for the Israeli military. It's all very well saying that it will be a limited incursion. If your objectives are to try and push Hezbollah back by a number of kilometers and clear the area of Hezbollah infrastructure, well, that is certainly achievable if you come up against very little opposition. But what if you do come up against significant opposition? What if Israeli soldiers are killed in quite large numbers? What if Hezbollah continues to fire into Israel, deeper into Israel, using the precision-guided missiles that we understand they have? Will it remain a limited incursion? Will Benjamin Netanyahu pull his forces out if they haven't succeeded in achieving their objectives within a matter of days? I don't think so. Benjamin Netanyahu, I have to say, has told the Americans on a number of occasions that this is what he would do, and then what he's actually done has been very much the opposite. And I think the Israeli government, and we have seen this plain as day over the last couple of weeks, has now decided that the northern border issue needs to be resolved, and they have been acting to that end over the last couple of days, and this is the next phase of it. And it comes with an awful lot of risk attached to it.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, it certainly is a slippery slope. I mean, watching this develop, you think, is this Israel's 9/11 moment where the Americans said they would go into a place like Afghanistan, they would limit their operations there, and then they got stuck for 20 years. Israel has been here before. Even in 1982, it said it would go in just to the southern border of Lebanon and then ended up in Beirut. So as you say, this is extremely risky for the Israelis now.
Ground invasions of Lebanon do not go particularly well historically for Israel. They might have a superior military than Hezbollah. They do have a superior military than Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is still a formidable force or we have to assume Hezbollah, I should say, are a formidable force despite what has happened over the last couple of weeks. And we will have to wait and see what kind of response Hezbollah has in return. And I think the other interesting factor in all of this that I'll keep a close eye on is the actions of the Lebanese armed forces. We're hearing reports they have pulled back to some of their more central bases in the south of the country. But ultimately, this is Lebanese territory. It might be Hezbollah-controlled Lebanese territory, but it is sovereign territory of the country of Lebanon. And do the Lebanese armed forces, the national armed forces, retreat to their bases and remain in their bases, or do they decide that there is an invading force in their country and therefore they have to stand up and fight as well? I think that is a major dilemma for the Lebanese armed forces, but it is crucial because it's crucial to whether or not this war widens, whether or not it is what Israel says it wants, limited, and a war against Hezbollah, or whether it very quickly becomes what it has at times seen over the last few weeks seem to be, and that is a war against Lebanon as a country. And that's before we even start talking about militia potentially coming in from Syria or Iraq to Syria in order to help out Hezbollah. So there is an awful lot that can go wrong here. And that is why there is so much nervousness in the Middle East and elsewhere around the world about what is happening right now.
Yeah, as you say, a lot of nervousness and a lot of worry about what limited means and whether it can truly be limited on the eve of this ground incursion that we're seeing. We've captured artillery fire, extremely heavy artillery fire. I'm just going to show that to our viewers again, just what's going on that border. You're looking at the very latest pictures there of heavy artillery fire in the border towns. And as Ali was saying there's a number of different reports coming out from Arab media networks saying that Israeli tanks are in Ramish, which is in southern Lebanon. We have not confirmed those as of yet. But what is certain and clear is that there is heavy artillery fire in those border towns, and it is believed that the offensive, while the Israelis say will be limited, is imminent or has already begun. Let's go straight to our Dominic Waghorn, who joins me from Washington. And Dom, no doubt the Americans, while they were given a heads up, they were informed by their Israeli counterparts that this was going to happen, and while they've been counseled by the Americans to ensure that this is limited and to still take the path of a ceasefire, no doubt they are incredibly concerned right now.
Yeah, they absolutely are. There's mounting sense of alarm here. And as we peer into the darkness and listen to those distant explosions and peer into the gloom of what's going on that border with Lebanon, as often we do when dealing with events moving in an uncertain direction in the Middle East and elsewhere, you look for clues really in what American officials, who are obviously very well informed and very well connected with Israel, what they're saying. And we've had a couple of, I think, interesting, vaguely illuminating briefings, one from the State Department. At the State Department, the spokesman said that Israel has told America about a number of limited operations focused on Hezbollah infrastructure near the border with Lebanon. It wasn't really clear from that whether he was saying they've been told about that as a sort of imminent or an operation that might happen in the near future, or whether that's actually happening. It's slightly ambiguous, the language that was being used there, but it certainly gives the impression that whatever's happening or is about to happen will focus on the border area and the infrastructure that Hezbollah have built up. And of course, they're not meant to be in the border area after the resolution 1701, the UN Security Council resolution that ended the 2006 war. That's the last time Israel was in Lebanon for 34 days, a very fierce and bloody war that killed, I think, almost 2,000 people. At the end of that war, the UN resolution 1701 ordered Hezbollah back to the Litani River, about 20 miles further north. Since then, they've crept forward and they are right up against the border, and that's been a massive frustration and source of military difficulty for the Israelis. So it would make sense for them to go in, certainly in the initial stages of any ground operation, and try and flush them out of that area. And that kind of follows what the New York Times has been saying this morning over here, reporting that America has been attempting to dissuade Israel from conducting a major ground invasion in Lebanon, and American officials believe that they have been productive in that. So if that might have been a kind of tussle between the Americans and the Israelis, and the Americans urging the Israelis not to go in great force and not to stay in there. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, when asked about what's going on, she referred the IDF, reporters to the IDF itself to talk about their own operations. But she said the Americans understand the strategic purpose of this is to make sure Hezbollah cannot maintain the capacity to attack Israeli communities on the opposite side of the border. It says Israel has a right to defend itself against Hezbollah and Iran-backed groups. We're in constant discussion with the Israelis on the best way to move forward. Of course, we want a ceasefire. So repeating what we've heard, I mean, any number of times from American officials and Western officials, that those calls for a ceasefire, but also saying Israel has a right to defend itself. And I think that the rub of it, really, for the Israelis is those lines to make sure Hezbollah cannot maintain the capacity to attack Israeli communities. The Israelis want to get their 60, 70,000 civilians back to the north, where they've effectively been evacuated from for almost a year now. And to do that, they have been hitting Hezbollah and decided to assassinate its commander. The question now is, have they decided that to actually achieve that, they need to go in and physically and forcefully remove Hezbollah from that area that they shouldn't be in, south of the Litani River? And is that militarily possible? Because as we were hearing from John and Ali there have been a number of Israeli invasions of Lebanon over the years. The first one in 1982 that went on to the year 2000, another one in 2006. They've not gone that well for Israel. It's a very difficult country for the infantry and particularly for tanks. And southern Lebanon is hilly. It's full of ravines. It's not Gaza. It's not flat. It's not a flat coastal plain where you can send in tanks and flush out Hamas. And Hezbollah are a different fighting force to Hamas. They are 100,000 strong. They're very well armed. They're very well trained, and they will be protecting their own country. So if Israel goes into that territory in force and tries to flush them out, they will have a fight on their hands, as they have in the past. And as Ali was saying also, that there is the severe risk of other supporters of Hezbollah flooding in to help them. Militia in Syria that Hezbollah have come to the aid of in the Syrian civil war. Iranian forces, although Iran may not become directly involved in any greater capacity than this, it may send the forces it has in Syria into southern Lebanon. It could quickly become a quagmire, and I think those sentiments will be being expressed and clearly have, according to a number of press reports here, to the Israelis by the Americans saying, if you're going to go into southern Lebanon, think it through and have a plan for how it will end and the day after, which is actually something the Americans have been very frustrated by the Israelis not having in their war in Gaza.
Indeed. I mean, just to pick up on that point, I'm going to speak now to John. But Dom, thank you so much for bringing us up to date and all of that analysis on what the Americans are saying and thinking and the counsel that they're providing, John, at this point. Because just to Dom's point there, I mean, the concern is, and we've heard in the various sermons that the Supreme Leader of Iran has given, the Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah speaking this afternoon, talking about patience, the victory will be ours, showing defiance, because while they may be leaderless at this point, they are heavily armed, and this is their terrain, this is their turf.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if Hezbollah has had one success in this war, which began on October 8th, Hezbollah opened fire with missiles and rockets in solidarity, they said, with Hamas in Gaza. If they have had one tactical success, it is in driving residents in northern Israel, 65,000 people, from their homes and keeping them out of their homes, to the great frustration of Netanyahu and his government. And they have been able to continue doing that. Now, let's say the Israelis pile into southern Lebanon. They say the scope is going to be limited. The operations will last for days, not weeks. The reach will be limited. That's what they've been briefing the Americans. Let's say they go into southern Lebanon. They drive Hezbollah back to the other side of the Litani River, which is what Netanyahu has said was the ultimate objective. The Litani River is about 30 kilometers north of the Lebanese frontier. What if Hezbollah continue to fire rockets and missiles? What if the Israelis are not able to put their citizens back in their homes? That's the question. What does Israel do?
Absolutely. It is a very risky moment for Israel as well, because they have had their troops engaged in Gaza for 11 months. These troops have often spoken about needing to be replenished, how they're suffering from, war fatigue. So to change and shift their focus now to this arena and then send special forces and ground troops in this arena, no matter how much you say it's going to be limited, there are so many things right now that could go wrong in that equation.
There really are. I mean, once they get in, once they get comfortable, we know that there has been, and there has long been, a disagreement between the Israelis and the Americans about scope of these Israeli wars that we have seen over the last year. But once they get in, they're not able to achieve their objectives. Aren't they likely to stay? You know, that's the danger for them. They're on Hezbollah turf, on Hezbollah's territory. They know it's very mountainous, it's very hilly. Hezbollah will have installations dug into the ground there. They are taking a risk. They're ultimately of losing Israeli soldiers, and that will be felt at home.
John, thank you so much. And of course, we will continue our conversation here. We're just going to take a very short break and leave you with these images of the heavy artillery fire across the border into southern Lebanon.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Hello and welcome back to our ongoing coverage of the situation here in the Middle East, live from Beirut. And as we've been reporting, Israel has told the United States that it plans to launch a limited ground incursion into Lebanon as soon as this evening. And from the artillery fire that our cameras have captured, and I can show you that in a moment, it does appear that that ground incursion is not imminent, but it may already have started. And of course, it's the dead of night, so there is only so much that we can see and report on, but local media are saying that they have already seen Israeli tanks in Ramesh in southern Lebanon. So things have suddenly and dramatically escalated here in this ongoing conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. And just to remind you, in the last week, Israel has more or less decapitated Hezbollah. It has taken out its longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah. It has taken out top commanders. It has left them injured and blinded, hands amputated following the pagers and walkie-talkies that exploded. Every single day we have been getting reports of different top commanders being targeted in different strikes in the south of the country, in the east of the country, and here in southern Beirut as well. So this has been an incredibly dramatic and tense 10 days or so. And the idea of a ground incursion being imminent has been something that has been discussed for at least a week and a half, and we understand that Israel has been probing. It has sent brigades to the area. It has sent its special forces. But this evening we are hearing that Israel has informed their counterparts in the United States that this ground incursion is imminent. Well, let's bring in my colleague, Alistair Bunkle, who is monitoring the situation on the other side of the border in Israel. And Ali, I mean, that artillery, heavy artillery fire that we saw, and of course, that area in the north of Israel has now become a military zone.
Yeah, I mean, these are all classic hallmarks ahead of an invasion. You know, first, a major air campaign. Well, we've seen that play over the last couple of weeks, and now the artillery going in a very intense fashion, and then you would expect ground forces to follow if they haven't already done so. I have to say, you know, officially, there is no word coming from the Israelis at the moment. Israeli journalists, Israeli security, defense, diplomatic, political journalists tend to be citing foreign media at the moment. Now, that could be because they're under IDF censorship. That does happen for sensitive moments, but also the Israelis just haven't yet said anything. I've been calling contacts of mine in the military and the political sphere who frankly would know what was going on, and getting nothing. They've gone very quiet. The IDF are normally very rapid to hold briefings with journalists. I mean, when those strikes came in that killed Hassan Nasrallah the other day, I mean, the smoke hadn't even cleared, and the IDF were holding a briefing to talk about it. Tonight, nothing whatsoever. So that might be an indication. The one, or the closest we've got to an Israeli official confirming that something is going on, is the Shas MP, Aryeh Deri, who is a close confidant of Benjamin Netanyahu's. He has sat in a lot of the decision-making forums over the last 12 months as the war in Gaza has gone on, and now the fighting in Lebanon has gone on, and he has tweeted tonight a Jewish prayer praying for the safety of IDF soldiers. So that is the closest anyone from Israeli officialdom has put anything on the record. But we wait and see, and it seems as though the briefings coming out of the United States through US officials, who I think it is reasonable to conclude have been kept at least partially in the loop about what's going on, it appears that those briefings are turning out to be accurate, and I think there was just a flash on the right-hand side of the screen there of more artillery going into southern Lebanon.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, we're talking now about an Israel that does feel emboldened. As far as, the strategy, people talk about what the end game here is, what the strategy is, but tactically they have had, as far as they're concerned, a very successful week and a half where they have assassinated Hezbollah's leader, they have taken out the top commanders. So they very much feel emboldened in this moment to do this.
They do. I mean, I would point out that they have total air superiority over Lebanon, really. I mean, they've been flying. When we talk about Hezbollah breaching UN Resolution 1701, the Israelis have been breaching it as well in their own way. They've been flying fighter jets through Lebanese airspace for years and years and years. But over the last couple of weeks, they have been able to do so pretty much unchallenged. But whether that's successful or not, I mean, that's up for debate. Where they have been very successful is in their intelligence, knowing where senior Hezbollah commanders are, and taking them out systematically. I mean, it has been a massive coup for Israeli intelligence. After the failures of October the 7th, they have regained some of their reputation. They know, the Americans know, Israelis know that entering Lebanon on the ground is a different prospect. It is very easy to go in. It is much harder to come back out again. You have to have objectives that you want to achieve, and you have to have some sort of end game in mind. But in war, the best laid plans quickly start to unravel, and that is what people fear could happen here, because it is unlikely. We don't know what Hezbollah are going to do. Hezbollah have been quite surprising over the last couple of weeks in the way they have probably been quite restrained in the number of missiles they fired into Israel, all things considered, given that a general secretary was taken out and senior commanders. We don't know what Hezbollah are going to do when Israeli forces go in, but the expectation is they are there and they will fight them.
Ali, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from Israel. Let me bring our John Sparks back in here, who is with me. And John, I mean, Israel has been here before, haven't they? They were here, you know, in 1982. They got stuck for 18 years. And then, of course, we saw the 2006 war as well.
Yeah, I mean, 2006, interesting. It was brief. It was a fierce conflict. But Hezbollah, particularly in the initial stages, they were shocked by Hezbollah. Hezbollah were effective on the ground. They had Russian anti-tank missiles at their disposal. They were able to take out Russian tanks. They were able to take out Israeli tanks. They were able to kill Israeli soldiers. It was a damaging conflict for the Israelis, but it was also a deeply damaging war for Hezbollah. The Israelis came in and they bombed much of South Beirut. They took out Dahir, where we saw these massive explosions that killed Hassan Nasrallah. In 2006, Hezbollah had to clean up and then rebuild it, because they're both a military organization and a political one as well, and they had to find the money to do that. And that is one reason why people have thought that Hassan Nasrallah was trying to avoid all-out war. He made a succession of speeches, and people were listening to what he was saying, and they were saying, hey, look, he's stalling. He doesn't want to take the next step here. That's what people were thinking. But now he's dead. His organization is decimated, rank and file and senior commanders, and now they look like they are facing an incursion or perhaps possibly a major invasion in the south. I mean, this is an organization that is reeling at the moment. It's going to be very difficult for them.
Yeah, indeed. Risks on both sides at this moment. But we're getting reports that Israel has told the United States that it plans to launch a limited ground incursion into Lebanon as soon as this evening. We can show you now the heavy artillery that took place a short while ago, captured by our cameras there, pointing towards southern Lebanon. Have a listen to this. Leader has said they're ready. Hezbollah's leader has said they're ready for an Israeli ground offensive.